I didn't yell, didn't accuse, just bought the test. Morning nausea, locked phone, missed period, 3 signs, 1 procedure. I slid the box across the counter like a contract. Natalie stared, frozen. 5 minutes isn't long, unless the future's inside a plastic stick. The silence after the bathroom door closed was surgical. Then she emerged, holding it like a verdict. 2 lines, unmistakable. I said nothing. No fight, no tears, just data. Booked the doctor anyway. 6, maybe 7 weeks, he said. I stepped outside, opened my calendar. Her Jamaica trip? 6.5. The arithmetic was louder than any confession. She didn't explain. I didn't ask. I drove home in a straight line, didn't flinch when she reached for my hand. There's a moment men like me don't plan for, when dignity and damage weigh the same. I found the only lever left that worked. I pulled it, and for the first time in years, she didn't know where I went. If this story hits somewhere real, share your thoughts below and subscribe to follow what came next. No noise, just the truth, one step at a time. Sun wasn't up yet, but the kitchen felt awake. Coffee steam, suitcase wheels rattling against the tile, Natalie in a sundress that made the room look warmer. She modeled 2 hats, asked which said vacation, then stuffed both into an already full bag. I joked about coming back with a regret tattoo. She rolled her eyes, kissed my cheek, and said she was past that phase. We ran the usual pre-trip checklist: passport, charger, sunscreen, like 2 people who've done life long enough to know that small routines keep big things steady. Outside, the rideshare idled. She hugged me quick, the kind of hug you give the dog before a walk, not a husband for a week apart. The door closed behind her hum, and the house exhaled. I rinsed 2 coffee mugs, left one to dry upside down, and told myself the day would be ordinary. It was so ordinary I almost missed what it was hiding. Tomorrow, the quiet starts to sound like a clue. Routine is the soundtrack of my life. Work emails, late meetings, leftovers in a glass container, the click of the thermostat at 9 p.m. Natalie texted photos: blue water, palm trees, a drink that looked like a postcard. Friends commented with hearts and beach emojis. I answered with thumbs up and looks amazing. In the evenings I walked the cul-de-sac, waved at the neighbor who grills no matter the weather, and let the dog from 2 doors down sniff my shoe like we'd signed a treaty. Nothing dramatic happened. That was the point. Stability can turn into blinders when it goes on long enough. Midweek, I glanced at our wall calendar and drew a little check mark on the date she'd be home. The pen squeaked. The sound was small, but it hung in the kitchen like a question. People say you'll feel it when something's off. Sometimes you don't. Sometimes you just keep moving the fork from sink to rack. Then, at 3 a.m., a weight sits on your chest. At 3 in the morning, the house is honest. The fridge hums, the water heater ticks, and the air knows your name. I woke up with a pressure in my chest, not pain, more like a hand reminding me to pay attention. No nightmare, no sirens, just a sense that the floor under my life had a seam I hadn't noticed. I sat on the edge of the bed, checked the time, and listened to the quiet the way you listen for a baby breathing in another room. My father used to say, if you ever feel uneasy for no reason, you have a reason. I poured a glass of water, stared at the porch light across the street, and told myself the feeling would pass. Morning would bring errands, email, and habit. Morning did, like it always does. I folded laundry, cleaned the coffee maker, and circled her return date twice. That night, the porch light across the street flickered. The next afternoon, the front door opened and the house changed temperature. She came in smelling like sunscreen and airport soap, a vacation layered over a layover. The hug landed short, more tap than hold, and she headed right for the shower, then another one before dinner, and again before bed. Long day, she said, toweling her hair, eyes on the floor. Usually, first night back is a travel reel. Who sat next to her, what the ocean felt like, why the hotel coffee tasted like cardboard. This time, answers were thumbnails. Fine. Nice. Nothing special. I set bags by the closet, lined up little bottles of lotion and a keychain shaped like a pineapple, and wrote 3 mental notes. Number 1, quick hug. Number 2, cereal showers. Number 3, no stories. It wasn't a fight. It was a gap, and gaps grow. Over dinner, she pushed the plate away, said the smell turned her stomach. I asked if she wanted ginger tea. A sigh, a shake of the head. The clock over the stove ticked louder than usual. Later, her phone lit up the hallway. The phone used to sit face up on the counter while we cooked, music streaming and timers beeping. Now it stayed glued to her palm, screen tilting away each time a notification buzzed. A new lock screen appeared, different photo, different code. She said it was nothing, just reorganizing. Maybe it was. But I watched small habits retire and new ones get sworn in. Stepping outside to answer, shutting doors gently but firmly, smiling without showing teeth. People who've shared a life develop muscle memory, handing over keys, finishing each other's sentences, calling out, "Who needs the charger?" from another room. That muscle felt sore. A ping came through. She pivoted toward the pantry, and the message preview vanished under a thumb. I wiped the counter longer than necessary, the way you do when you're thinking through a knot. No questions from me. Questions invite stories. I wanted facts. That night, I moved laundry to the dryer and checked pockets like always. A folded receipt slipped out and changed the temperature in the room. Morning brought clipped answers. How was the resort? Fine. What did you do at night? Nothing special. 8 years and I could count arguments on one hand. This felt different. Not loud, tilted. She caught herself, apologized, said jet lag was a thief. Maybe. The receipt from the dryer sat in my wallet. Resort logo on one side, a name scrawled on the back, Darius, in ink that bled a little where sweat met paper. I made coffee, watched 2 cups steam side by side, and realized only one would be emptied. When a house changes tone, it's like a radio shifting off station. Words still come through, but music turns to static. I chose observation over theater. Not a test, not a trap, just patience. I marked the calendar again, this time for something only I knew, a conversation I would not rush. People think truth arrives with a shout. Often it walks in on quiet feet. Mine was almost here, and the kitchen clock was the only one polite enough to announce it. Morning started wrong. The kettle sang. Natalie beat it to the sink. She gripped the counter, breathing through a wave that left her pale, said it had to be the food from the trip. I offered dry toast, ginger, the old remedies every family keeps in a drawer with rubber bands and batteries. She waved them off, promised it would pass. I watched the color drain and thought about how the body tells the truth before the mouth does. At work, I caught myself staring at a spreadsheet, reading the same cell like it held a secret. On the drive home, a radio host talked about traffic and baseball, and I realized I hadn't heard a word. Back in the kitchen, I wiped the table twice and checked the trash for unfamiliar packaging. Nothing. She tried soup, closed her eyes, pushed it away. The evening settled heavy. Some problems sound like a knock on the door. This one sounded like someone holding their breath on the other side. Dinner used to be simple. Grill marks, a salad, a quiet blessing. Now the smell of onions made her flinch, and the fridge felt like a minefield. She said everything was too strong, even when I barely seasoned the chicken. She traded fitted tops for looser ones, said she wanted comfort after travel. I took the hint and kept the conversation practical. Laundry, the package on the porch, the neighbor's fence repair that keeps leaning into our yard. Mid-sentence, she touched her stomach and forced a smile I didn't recognize. I cleaned up early and took out the trash, the kind of chore you do when you need to move but can't go anywhere important. Out by the bins, the air was cleaner, and the world felt ordinary again. Dog barks, a plane overhead, someone practicing piano down the block. I went back inside and wrote 2 more mental notes. 4 scent sensitivity, 5 wardrobe shift. Then I circled the return date on the calendar, again. Laundry is where routine lives. Coins in a bowl, a pen rescued before it ruins a shirt, the soft thud of the dryer starting its run. I checked her jeans pockets the way I always do and felt paper fold under my thumb. A resort receipt, logo bright, date from the trip. On the back, a name in ink that bled at the edges. Darius. Not a waiter's signature, not a spa tech, just a first name that didn't belong to my life. My hands didn't shake. My breath did something quieter, short, controlled, like a runner waiting for the gun. I turned it over, once, twice, then slid it back into the same pocket and started the cycle. The machine hummed, and the room felt colder by a few degrees. People think a discovery arrives with a cymbal crash. Mine came with the low, steady drum of a dryer. When she asked later if I'd seen her favorite jeans, I said they were spinning. So was I. The living room lamp cast a warm circle. She stepped outside its edge every time her phone buzzed. "Vanessa," she'd say, or "Corinne," like a password, and slip out to the patio. The door clicked shut with the kind of care you use when a baby finally falls asleep. I poured coffee, let it go cold, then switched to water because my hands needed something to do. Through the window, I saw her pace, head tilted, the nods too precise for friendly chatter. When she came back in, the air traveled with her, cooler, tighter. I wanted to ask a simple question and hear a simple answer. Instead, I opened the cabinet and fixed a loose hinge that had waited 6 months for attention. The tiny turn of a screwdriver steadied me more than words would have. The phone lit again and she rose without thinking. By the third trip outside, I knew this wasn't about courtesy to friends. It was distance, newly installed. You don't need a detective when patterns volunteer. Morning nausea, smell aversions, closed doors for open calls, ink on the back of a resort receipt spelling a stranger's name. I laid the pieces out the way my mother used to lay quilt squares, color by color, edge to edge, until the picture refused to be anything else. I kept my voice even, my footsteps normal, my schedule steady. Emotion wants the wheel, facts get you home. After dinner, I wiped the counter and looked at the wall calendar again. I traced the line from her departure to today, counted weeks without saying the number out loud. In the garage, I checked the spare tire because some part of me still believes preparation changes fate. It doesn't. It changes you. I locked the back door, turned off lights, and sat at the table in the dark until the fridge clicked on. That sound felt like agreement. The next move needed to be simple, surgical, and mine. I drove to a pharmacy 2 neighborhoods over, the kind where the clerk knows which aisle holds what before you ask. The overhead music played an old song about second chances. I stood in front of a wall of small boxes promising certainty in minutes. I chose a brand I recognized from late-night commercials, paid cash, and asked for a paper bag like I was buying a greeting card. Back home, I set the box on the counter and let it sit there, plain as bread. When Natalie walked in, I slid it across the surface like a contract. No speech, no theater, just a decision I'd already made. Get the truth without arguing about it. The house went quiet, the kind of quiet that respects the gravity of a moment. She stared, then picked it up. The bathroom door closed with a soft latch. 5 minutes can be a lifetime. I counted the hums of the fridge and waited for the only answer that mattered. The kitchen was bright enough to see dust on the fruit bowl. I slid the small box across the counter like a contract and said, "You don't have to go buy one. I already did." Natalie froze with her hand on the back of a chair. The moment felt refrigerated, air moving, time not. I've signed mortgages and watched surgeons mark an X before a routine procedure. This felt closer than both. She looked at the logo, then at me, as if eye contact could delay chemistry. I didn't add speeches about trust or respect. The point of a thermometer is not to debate fever. She picked it up with 2 fingers, the way you lift an envelope that might hold a check or a bill. The hallway to the bathroom felt longer than usual. The door latched softly, the fan hummed, and the house developed a heartbeat you could hear in the silverware drawer. I stood still and let the counter support the weight I wouldn't show. Anyone who's waited for bread to rise or a smoke alarm to stop knows certain minutes stretch. These 5 did. The bathroom fan blended with the refrigerator's motor and the wall clock's second hand, a small orchestra that plays only for people standing still. I focused on breath like a steady metronome. In for 4, out for 6, repeat until the pulse in your neck agrees to behave. I thought about ordinary timers, laundry cycles, a roast resting, the dentist telling you to bite gently, how each one insists on patience. My phone face down on the table felt like a rule I could keep. I did not pace. Instead, I straightened the mail, lined up the salt and pepper, and watched a sunbeam slide across the floor as if the day were rehearsing for tomorrow. When the latch finally clicked, I understood why juries stand for verdicts. The door opened an inch, then two. Natalie stepped out, shoulders tucked in, a small white stick balanced on her palm. She held it toward me like a ruling, no preface, no apology. 2 lines, unmistakable. You learn, over time, that some news doesn't need volume. The body reads it before the brain translates. My first instinct was to steady the room, hands flat on the counter, knees unlocked, eyes on one fixed point, like you do when a boat hits a wake. I nodded once, not at her, but at the information. No fight, no tears, just data. I've stood over budgets and watched numbers turn the page on plans. This was the same click, only closer to the bone. Natalie searched my face for the next scene. I offered none. I set the test down on a paper towel, an ordinary kindness, and tossed the box in the trash because rituals matter when everything else tilts. Then I reached for my keys. Not to run, to drive us to someone who would speak in weeks and dates, the language that doesn't care how you feel. White walls, rolling stool, a poster explaining something I already knew. The physician asked routine questions in a voice designed for people who forget to breathe. Blood pressure cuff, keyboard clatter, a nod. Based on what I'm seeing, 6, maybe 7 weeks. She tapped the screen the way a teacher underlines a lesson. I watched her finger, not the picture. Clinics have their own weather, cool, measured, fluorescent, useful when your life is running hot. I thanked her out loud and, in my head, thanked every calendar I've ever kept. After checkout, we walked down a hallway lined with framed diplomas and a photo of a sunrise that never belonged to this building. At the elevator, Natalie stared at the floor numbers like they were making up their minds. Outside, the sun had the honest color it gets after rain. I didn't look for signs, omens, or loopholes. Facts don't hide in clouds. They sit on desks and come with printouts you fold twice and pocket. In the parking lot, I opened my calendar and scrolled to the day she left. 6.5 weeks ago. My thumb measured the distance like a carpenter counting studs under drywall. I said the number inside my head first to make sure it could stand without a wall around it. It did. I've heard plenty of stories in my life, some true, some wishful, some better left unspoken. Arithmetic isn't a story, it's a floor. When you step on it, you know what will happen next. I didn't feel rage so much as clarity, the kind that shows up when a smoke alarm cuts through a busy kitchen. Natalie leaned against the passenger door, arms crossed as if bracing for weather. No questions from me. Questions invite theater. I pressed the home button on the navigation screen and watched the blue line appear, a straight ribbon across familiar streets. The route needed no adjustments. Neither did the conclusion. The truth had already parked itself. Traffic was light. Wipers squeaked once across a clean windshield, muscle memory without a reason. Natalie chewed her lip and watched the side mirror like it might offer a safer view. I kept both hands at 10 and 2, the way my father taught me on a county road where ditches forgive nothing. We passed the grocery we use for quick dinners, the park where Saturday mornings used to mean coffee and a bench, the hardware store that knows my name. I wasn't planning revenge. I was planning order. Call Tom. Document. Separate. The list wrote itself in the same steady print I use for appliance model numbers and insurance renewal dates. At a red light, she reached for my hand. I looked at the signal, waited for green, and let the moment expire with it. There's a point in a man's life when dignity and damage weigh the same. Today they did. I chose the side that lets you sleep. And then I started preparing. We sat at the kitchen table we'd eaten 100 quiet dinners on, the one with a faint ring from a coffee mug that never quite dried. I kept my voice low. Who is Darius? Natalie's breath shortened, like stairs appeared where the floor used to be. A man in Jamaica. It was one time, she said, words breaking apart as they left her mouth. I just wanted to try. The sentence didn't echo. It landed with a dull weight, like a tool dropped in a garage. I stared at the edge of a placemat and felt something inside me fold, then straighten. No scene, no noise, just confirmation. She waited for fireworks, for the kind of explosion people swap stories about. What she got was a nod and a quiet I could live inside. I stood, rinsed a cup, and set it upside down on the rack. That small click was my response. The house understood it before she did. Control had walked into the room. Silence has a job when words start lying. I let it work. Natalie circled me with explanations. Drinks too strong, music too loud, a night that slid out of her hands. The sentences tried on different coats, hoping one would fit. I wiped the counter, folded a dish towel, and gave the quiet a wide lane. Years teach you that not every question earns an answer, and not every wound wants stitches right away. She asked if I hated her. I stared at the clock above the stove, watched the second hand bow to gravity and keep moving. Anger would have been easier. Quick burn, big smoke. This felt more like switching off a breaker and deciding which lights should stay dark. When she reached for more words, I pushed my chair back and let the legs settle on all four corners. That sound, a simple wooden thud, closed the conversation better than any speech. We slept under the same roof. We did not sleep in the same storm. Apologies came like waves that never found the shore. I was drunk. I wasn't thinking. I thought it could disappear. I sat in my usual spot on the couch, the one that faces the window where the streetlight turns the trees silver. I listened the way you listen to a neighbor's lawnmower 2 houses over, aware but without urgency. A bottle of water sweat onto a coaster. The dog down the block barked at nothing and then at nothing again. I remembered a talk my father gave me before a hard conversation at work. Keep your voice calm and your notes clear. I opened my laptop, not to escape, but to sort. Insurance logins, bank bookmarks, the folder where we keep appliance manuals and serial numbers. Practical things have a way of steadying your hands. Around midnight, she cried herself quiet. I closed the lid, turned off the lamp, and let the hallway nightlight draw a slim line to morning. That line looked a lot like a boundary. Morning has its own courage. Coffee, a shower, a shirt that fits right. I sat at the desk we bought on a Labor Day sale and typed family attorney near me. Names filled the screen. Thomas Tom Avery stood out. Reviews that sounded like real people, not brochures. I called. My voice surprised me. Level, almost bored, as if ordering a part for a washer. He asked for facts, not stories. I had those. He offered an appointment that day. I said yes and drove across town past the shop that fixes lawn equipment and the church thrift store that never changes its window display. Tom's office was orderly without being cold. He listened without leaning in too close. When I finished, he paused just long enough to show he'd heard all of it. "We'll keep this clean," he said. Clean. That word felt like air. He outlined steps. I took notes on a yellow pad I keep for home projects. Different project, same pencil. Tom laid it out like a checklist you could tape inside a cabinet door. Separate finances. Document everything. Channel communication through him. No public drama, no private bargaining sessions, facts in writing, feelings in a notebook that never leaves the house. I've repaired a leaking sink with less clarity than he gave me. We built a folder, dates, receipts, the medical confirmation, a copy of the calendar page with the trip marked in blue. He explained timing the way a good mechanic explains a belt, what it does, why it matters, when to replace it. I signed what needed signing and left with a plan that fit in a manila envelope in the front pocket of my mind. Outside, I sat in the car and let the air vents even out the temperature. A plan is a kind of shelter. You can stand under it while the storm announces itself. When I pulled onto the road, the turn signal sounded like agreement. Left, then straight. Back home, I opened a new account and moved the numbers the way you move valuables before a renovation. Not hiding, protecting. I printed statements, dated a simple timeline, and clipped them together like a recipe you don't want to lose. I took photos of the receipt and the test box, then emailed them to myself because copies are what survive. In the garage, I labeled a plastic bin, documents, set it on the shelf above the tool bag, and felt my shoulders drop a half-inch. A plan is a dock you can tie to when the water lifts the boat. Natalie asked if we could talk later. Through Tom, I said, steady as a level bubble. The line held. That night I cooked something plain, eggs, toast, salt, and ate at the counter I'd cleared, 1 plate, 1 fork. Sleep came like an honest debt finally paid. For the first time in weeks I felt the floor under me stop moving. Tomorrow would pay attention, so would I. Tom and I built the file like a carpenter squares a frame, straight lines, no wobble. On top sat the petition. Behind it, a clean timeline with dates anyone could follow with a finger. Next, the medical confirmation. 6, maybe 7 weeks, copied and initialed. Then a short statement documenting what she told me at the table, signed in her handwriting that loops on the Ys. I added photos of the receipt and the test box, plus a printed calendar page with the Jamaica flight circled in blue. The order mattered. When storms hit, shelves keep things off the floor. I slid the stack into a manila folder and tested the clasp twice. On a sticky note, I wrote 3 rules. Keep calm, say little, stick to process. The pen left a groove you could feel with your thumb. That's what I wanted. Edges. Later, when the house grew quiet enough to hear vents open and close, the folder sat on the counter like a compass pointing one way only. She asked to talk after dinner. No TV, no music, the kind of setup couples use when they're going to be brave. She suggested counseling, a weekend away, a plan to start fresh if we both gave it time. The words were familiar. Good tools, wrong job. I leaned back an inch, enough to keep balance without inviting the old rhythm. People want a scene where promises pull the wheel hard left. Promises are only steering if the road's still ours. I kept my hands flat on my knees and listened for the sentence that would change the math. It didn't arrive. Instead, I saw postcards from places we hadn't booked, a calendar that kept turning even if we tore out the page. She reached for stories. We can rebuild. We can get past it. I pictured the foundation under our house. Concrete that doesn't argue. The room felt level in a new way. Time to honor that. Time to trade hope for clarity without cruelty. I stood, walked to the counter, and brought the folder back like a tray I didn't want to drop. The papers went on the coffee table with a sound you only notice when your heart quiets. A soft, final thud. These are divorce filings, I said. They've been submitted. From here on, communication goes through Tom. Her face searched mine for a loophole, a smile, a smudge she could rub into an opening. None appeared. There's a form of mercy in speaking plainly once. She picked up the top page, eyes moving faster than breath, and set it down like it might stain. I sat again, the couch cushion giving in the same spot it always does. Even the familiar can hold a new meaning. She asked if I was sure. Certainty doesn't shout. It signs and dates. The papers already had both. The room didn't spin. The clock didn't rush. The only thing that moved was us, out of the land of maybe and into done. She called it a mistake, as if the word could shrink it to a drop of milk on the counter. A mistake is dropping a glass, I said. This was a choice. I'm making mine. The sentence fit like a tool that never belonged anywhere else. She shook her head, reaching for origin stories, music, drinks, a night that slid out of her hands. The kitchen light hummed. The refrigerator kicked on. Every appliance in the house knew its job. So did I. I kept my tone even, not to be cold, but to keep the rails aligned. People think dignity is a speech. Most days it's a boundary with a hinge that swings only one way. I pointed to the line we'd crossed and the one I was drawing now. She pressed her palms together, then let them fall. There was nothing left to bargain with. Truth had already counted the weeks and folded the printouts. I stood, and the chair legs made the same honest sound they always make. "Is there someone else?" she asked, like a trap door might open if I said yes. I shook my head. There doesn't need to be someone else for me to respect myself. The room tested that sentence and found it level. A lot of men wait for a new hand to pull them out. Some climbs you do alone. She looked at the door, then back at me, realizing this wasn't a pause between rounds. This was the bell. I gathered my wallet, the spare key I keep in a dish by the entry, and the folder. She reached out, not a grab, more like touching a photograph before putting it away. We held eye contact long enough to say everything neither of us could use. I wasn't angry. Anger would have tried to win. I was finished. The thermostat clicked, and the air shifted a single degree cooler. You notice small changes when the big one lands. The last illusion broke quietly. This conversation wasn't a negotiation. It was notice. I took a duffel from the closet and laid it flat on the bed we'd both ironed around for years. 3 shirts, 2 pairs of jeans, socks, the jacket with a dependable zipper, chargers, toiletries, documents in the inside pocket where passports usually ride. I left the framed photos, the anniversary bottle opener, the ticket stub from a ball game that once felt like a promise. Some things belong to the old story. Let them stay there. Natalie stood in the doorway, smaller than the space around her. No speeches from me. Packing is its own language. Fold, place, close. I zipped the bag and lifted it in one motion, the kind that tells your back you've judged the weight right. At the dresser, I paused, not for sentiment, but to check the top drawer for anything practical I'd hate to replace on a Tuesday. The house had a memory of us. Memories can be kind without being persuasive. I turned off the bedside lamp and carried my quiet to the door. At the threshold, she asked for one more conversation, palms lifted like she could hold the room together by hand. "Please don't leave," she said, voice thin from a night without sleep. I set the duffel down long enough to breathe once and answer once. "You already did this without me," I said, the way you say a truth you won't revisit. The hallway smelled like lemon cleaner and last week's flowers. I checked the pockets, wallet, keys, phone, the folder from Tom, then turned the knob. She reached for my sleeve, more touch than tug. I stepped through and felt the latch click, a small, decisive sound that carried farther than raised voices ever do. Outside, the porch light was still on from habit. I shut it off, locked the door, and walked to the car. My hands knew the routine. Bag in, seatbelt across, mirrors set. Somewhere a lawn sprinkler kicked on. The engine turned, caught, and the weight I'd been hauling shifted from chest to road. Dawn met me halfway down the block, pink in the east, streetlights timing out one by one. The highway opened like a promise I didn't trust yet, so I kept it simple. Cruise at the limit, both hands on the wheel, a thermos of coffee from the night before. Talk radio murmured about weather and a ball game. I let the words pass like fence posts. Passing the grocery we used for late dinners felt like stepping over a cord I'd once tripped on daily. The county line sign showed up small and green, and I rolled over it the way you roll a heavy appliance onto a dolly, slow, controlled, with a plan for fingers and toes. My breathing found a rhythm that matched the mile markers. It's strange how the body keeps score and then suddenly calls it even. By the time the sun cleared the billboards, I could name the feeling riding shotgun. Relief. Not celebration. Not triumph. Just something lighter choosing to stay. By lunchtime, the phone store printed a receipt with a fresh number and handed me a SIM card small enough to lose under a sugar packet. I saved Tom first, then Carter, then the pharmacy, like a home kit you hope you won't need. The leasing office smelled like copier toner and coffee that had waited too long. I initialed where they pointed and signed where it mattered. The manager slid 2 keys across the desk and said, "Welcome." The apartment had the good kind of emptiness. Paint still clean, blinds that worked, outlets exactly where you want a lamp. I set the duffel on the carpet and made a short list. Mattress, 2 plates, a pan, a towel I won't mind ruining someday. At the utility counter online, I chose my own security questions and smiled that none were about wedding dates. Mid-afternoon, I stood at the window and watched a dog walker pass 3 leashes over one wrist without tangling. That's the goal now. Simple, steady, untangled. The first dinner was eggs in a skillet that has seen better kitchens, toast cut on a cardboard box because the cutting board is still an idea. I ate standing at the counter and realized how much noise a fork makes when it only answers to one plate. After cleanup, I let the TV stay dark and listened to the building settling, pipes ticking, a neighbor laughing 2 floors up, the hallway door sighing closed. The bed was a mattress on the floor with clean sheets and no history. I slept like a shift worker who finally got off the night crew, straight through, no sprinting hard at 3 a.m., no mental courtroom replaying testimony that never changes. Morning arrived with honest light and no alarm, and I made coffee in a stovetop pot my father used to keep for camping trips. The cup tasted like a decision finished. Peace isn't dramatic. It's the sound the world makes when you stop shaking it, and it keeps making that sound anyway. I texted Carter a pin and met him at a diner that still warms pie in a glass case. He looked at the new number on his screen and raised a brow. I nodded. We talked like men who've painted rooms together, efficient, no wasted strokes. He asked what I needed. Privacy and a plan, I said. He slid a folded 20 across the table, for good luck, the way he does before every fishing trip. We laughed, because luck isn't the point, and we both know it. Tom called between coffee refills. Paperwork clean, next date straightforward, he said. I wrote them on a napkin, then moved them to my phone the moment the check came. Back at the apartment, I put the napkin in a drawer anyway. A small superstition never hurt a sober plan. Only 2 people knew where I slept that night. Fewer moving parts, less noise to manage. I locked the door and liked the sound. It meant the circle was doing its job. The first message arrived through Tom. Apologies braided with memories, the kind of letter that wants to be 2 things at once. He asked how I wished to respond. I opened a blank document and typed a sentence, then erased it. Typed another, erased that too. Sometimes the smartest thing you can say is a direction. Please acknowledge receipt on my behalf. No further comment, I wrote to Tom, and hit send. The next day, another message. Same route, same answer. I'm not angry at the mailman. I'm just clear about the address. Boundaries look cold from a distance. Up close, they're care. For your sleep, your work, your friends who don't need to carry this. I took a walk at dusk and waved at a neighbor carrying laundry in from the communal room, a basket balanced on her hip like it weighed nothing. When I got back, my phone was quiet. I turned it face down anyway. Some lines are worth drawing twice just to feel the steadiness. I spent a Saturday morning at the kitchen counter with a yellow pad and 3 folders. Bank, bills, benefits. Numbers calm a room if you let them. I matched statements to pay stubs, checked auto pays, canceled a couple of subscriptions that only made sense when 2 people shared a couch. Insurance got its own line, because coverage laps are the sort of mistake that pretends to be small until it isn't. I listed obligations I'd keep and circled the ones that ended with the signature. A spreadsheet replaced the ache that keeps you awake. Cells and columns have no agenda beyond balance. When the totals matched what Tom predicted, I felt something click into place like a drawer you finally shim. I scanned documents and backed them up twice, computer and a thumb drive that lives in the freezer behind the peas, a trick my uncle taught me after a house fire. Order doesn't fix everything, but it builds a floor sturdy enough to carry what's next. People love a revenge story because it promises a second ending. I chose gravity. No hunting down Darius, no broadcast, no cryptic posts inviting detectives with nothing at stake. Consequences have a way of finding their owners without the help of a marching band. I focused on my square of the chessboard. Work on time, bills on schedule, sleep honest. On a jog, I passed a neighbor teaching a kid to ride a bike, jogging behind with one hand light on the seat. Balance comes from forward motion, not a hand squeezing harder. That picture stayed with me when my phone buzzed with a number I didn't save. Silence answered. At night, I read the manual for a used coffee grinder I picked up at a thrift store. Burrs tighten, grounds change, small adjustments steer outcomes. I set it to medium and thought about how life can taste better without extra bitterness. Some things don't need an audience. They need a door that closes and stays shut. Grief wants chaos. I gave it a schedule. Up at 6, shoes by the door, a half-hour run that ends where it begins. Breakfast that belongs to adults who've learned the difference between hunger and habit. Eggs, fruit, water. Work came into focus again once I stopped scrolling through empty space. At lunch, I walked a loop around the block and waved at a guy who fixes lawnmowers out of his garage. The smell of cut grass made the world behave for a minute. Evenings, I cooked simple, cleaned as I went, and wrote 3 lines in a notebook. 1 fact, 1 feeling, 1 step. Feelings earned a page, not the steering wheel. Week by week, muscles remembered they had a job beyond bracing. Sleep returned like an old friend who doesn't need an apology. Routine isn't a cage, it's a railing on stairs steeper than you planned for. By Sunday, I could hear my own thoughts without static. None of them asked for yesterday back. Tom treats court like a shop manual. Identify the part, confirm the fit, tighten to spec. We sat across from each other with the file open. The test, the doctor's note, the calendar, the receipt with Darius on the back. He walked me through what a judge needs. Clean dates, clear cause, calm delivery. I practiced answers the way a person practices safe following distance. Enough space to stop without skidding. Yes, Your Honor. Correct. That timeline is accurate. We printed 2 extra sets because paper seems to multiply only when you don't have enough. He reminded me that silence can be an expert witness if you let the document speak. I left with a slim binder and the strange peace that comes from knowing there are no surprise chapters. On the drive home, the car made a small rattle I'd been ignoring. I pulled into a bay, had the heat shield tightened in 10 minutes, and smiled at the metaphor. Little things secured early save bigger repairs later. The night before court, I set out clothes like a student before a big exam: dark jacket, clean shoes, a pen that writes the first time. I repeated 3 rules like a prayer: no character attacks, no speeches, only facts. A neighbor on the stairwell kept the door for me and said, "Big day tomorrow?" I nodded and thanked him like we were talking about a delivery window. At the kitchen table, I opened the binder and read each page until the words grew boring. Boring is good. Boring means steady. I brewed decaf, called Carter, and promised him I'd keep it between the lines. He told me about a fishing trip where the line stayed taut all afternoon without snapping. Sometimes control feels like that. No flourish, just form. Before bed, I set my phone to Do Not Disturb and placed the binder by the door. Sleep arrived on time. The morning would require composure, not performance. Rails were set. All I had to do was ride them. Courthouses smell like paper and polish. We checked in, sat on a hallway bench that had met every kind of shoe. When our case was called, the room felt smaller than TV makes it. No gallery gasps, just a judge, a clerk, 2 lawyers, and a clock that doesn't care. Tom spoke first, crisp and spare. My turn came and I answered what was asked, nothing more. The timeline held. The documents did their job. Natalie kept her eyes on the table. I kept mine on the judge. 10 minutes can refurbish a life if you let clarity swing the hammer. The gavel's rap sounded like a lid closing on a box you're finally done packing. Outside, the sky was the ordinary blue I'd missed. Tom shook my hand and said, "Clean." 1 word, enough. I walked to the car without checking my phone, sat behind the wheel, and let the air vents sweep the cabin cool. No parade, no anthem, just clean air and a road pointing forward. Tom called while I was rinsing a coffee mug, the kind you keep because the handle fits your hand. "You handled this better than most," he said. I let the faucet run a second longer than needed. "I chose the only way that kept me sane," I told him. He reviewed next steps in a voice built for weathering storms. Final copies, a quiet period, practical reminders about passwords and mail. Nothing dramatic, just the clean sound of drawers closing. I thanked him, ended the call, and dried the mug with a towel I'd bought yesterday, stiff from newness. On the table sat the binder, thinner now, no more tabs to add. I set my phone face down and wrote a short list on an index card. Groceries, oil change, call mom. Ordinary things, the kind that stitch days together. The card looked small, which is exactly what I wanted. 1 line at a time, a life I could read back without flinching. Early evening, I took a slow lap around the block. Porch lights clicked on in sequence like a neighborhood nod. A man in work boots shook a rug over a railing. A kid practiced layups against a garage door. Someone grilled something that smelled like history. I passed a yard with a bird bath, the water rippling from nothing more than wind. The sidewalks weren't perfect. Hairline cracks, a dandelion winning a fight no one started. But they held. A retired couple arranged folding chairs to watch the sky change. We traded small talk about weather and a stray cat that refuses to pick a house. The ordinary felt like a blessing that doesn't need a ceremony. By the time I looped back to my door, I could feel my feet trusting the ground. Not celebrating, not pretending, just weight meeting surface, and both behaving. Inside, I wrote down 1 sentence. I'm on solid floors again. It read like a promise I could keep. There's a temptation to watch the old life through a keyhole, scroll a name, ask a friend, chase updates that don't belong to you anymore. I let the temptation pass the way you let a wave roll under a dock. Natalie's choices live on her calendar now, mine live on mine. When the mind reached for what-ifs, I gave it a task. Cook a pot of chili for the week, clean the stovetop, replace the smoke detector battery before it chirps at 2 a.m. A neighbor knocked to borrow a Phillips head. I handed it over and fixed a loose hinge while we laughed about the cabinet that never quite behaved. Helping with small repairs felt like medicine you don't taste. Back at my place, I folded laundry straight from the dryer, warm enough to remind me life keeps moving even when you step aside. Peace arrived not as a headline, but as a quiet agreement. The past can keep time without me watching the clock. Carter showed up with a 6-pack, and that look that means he'll stay as long as needed and leave the moment silence turns to rest. We sat on the balcony, feet up on the rail, watching taillights string together like beads on a wire. He asked how the apartment felt. Like a clean page, I said. We talked about everything but the thing. His truck's brakes, the river running high this year, the diner that still serves pie from a glass case. At one point, he slid a pocket knife across the table, a habit from our camping days. You won't need it, he grinned, but it feels good to know it's there. We laughed, clinked bottles, and let the night have its say. Before he left, he looked me straight on. You're lighter, he said. I didn't argue. After the door closed, I washed the 2 glasses, lined them on the rack like bookends, and noticed the shelf between them holding steady. In the morning, I shaved with the mirror cabinet open, catching my own eyes between strokes. For years, I measured stability by the shape beside me in bed, the sound of a second toothbrush in a cup, the double click of a shared lock. Now I measured it by the steadiness of my hand and the way my chest stayed quiet while the coffee brewed. Who are you when no one is watching? It's a tough question until you're the only witness. I wiped the glass, closed the cabinet, and stood still long enough to hear the apartment breathe. Pipes ticking, a neighbor's radio low, the hum of a world that functions whether or not you push it. The answer was simple and hard. I am the person who refuses to lie to his reflection. Not heroic, not tragic, just honest enough to carry forward without a wobble. I left the house with that sentence folded like a note in my pocket. Some lessons arrive with trumpets. Mine came like instructions printed on the inside of a cabinet door. Self-respect isn't a billboard. It's a boundary you build and maintain. Hinges oiled, latch aligned, no rust allowed. I wrote 3 lines in my notebook. Truth first, process next, quiet always. Then I tested them against a Tuesday. Work calls, a sink that drains too slow, a neighbor who locks herself out and needs a steady hand through a window. The lines held. I cooked dinner for one without calling it lonely, set tomorrow's coffee, laid out clothes that fit the life I'm choosing. Before bed, I opened the window 2 inches and let cool air move the curtains. There was no speech waiting in my throat, no audience to convince, just a man choosing to stand where the floor doesn't lie. I turned off the light and knew I'd find the switch again because the room finally matched the map in my head. What if used to be the screensaver in my head, always moving, never useful. I turned it off. What now fits on a sticky note and sits beside the sink. What now? Make coffee, return calls, pay the bill that's due Friday. What now? Take the long way home to learn the new streets without the old ghosts. I boxed a few things that didn't belong to this chapter, duplicate pans, sentimental junk that argues for storage, and drove them to a donation center where a volunteer in a neon vest said, "We'll find this a good home." That sentence was enough. On the ride back, the radio played an old song about staying and leaving. I let it be background noise. At a red light, I tapped the steering wheel and felt steady. The day before had edges. Today had a center. I wrote 1 line in my notebook before bed. Forward is the only direction that pays rent. It read like instructions you can follow barefoot. I carried the old house key in my pocket for a week, then dropped it into a hardware store recycling bucket labeled metal only. No speech, just a faint clink that sounded like a drawer closing in another room. Back home, I opened my phone and shut off the 6 a.m. alarm that used to yank me awake for worry I couldn't name. Morning came on its own anyway, soft and on time. I made a list of tidy tasks, a new doormat, a spare plunger, a light bulb for the lamp that sat dim in the corner, and bought them in one trip so the apartment would stop feeling temporary. That night, I replaced the bulb and the room brightened without effort, like someone found the right word in a conversation that had wandered. Small rituals establish borders without announcing themselves. When I turned in, the bed felt earned. The key was gone, the alarm was quiet, and both hands knew where to rest. I opened a fresh wall calendar and started where I stood, not where I'd been. Work hours in blue, runs in green, dinners I'd cook instead of order in pencil because menus can change. Sundays got a box for phone calls that keep families stitched. Mom, my sister, a cousin who always asks about the car. I penciled oil changes, dentist, the once-a-month chore nobody likes, clean the fridge and mean it. On the side, I added a list titled Better Inputs, sleep, water, a book before bed. The squares began to look like a scaffold instead of a cage. I snapped a photo so the plan would live in my pocket too. That evening, I followed the day's boxes without forcing them. Ran the set miles, cooked a decent dinner, cleaned as I went. The satisfaction wasn't fireworks. It was a level bubble settling between two lines. Tomorrow's square waited without pressure. The month finally looked like something I could carry without dropping. Hatred is heavy luggage. It argues to be carried everywhere and tips over in doorways. I set it down. What I keep is a line. Quiet, painted once, repainted when scuffed. That line keeps me from telling old stories to new people who never asked to hold them. It keeps me from inventing villains and from auditioning for the hero. At the grocery, I saw a brand of coffee we used to buy and reached for it out of habit, then chose another without making it a sermon. Boundaries do their job when choices get simple again. On a walk, I passed a couple arguing by a mailbox. Their words chased each other and caught nothing. I sent them a silent wish for clarity and kept moving. Back home, I wiped the counter after dinner and noticed the surface shine with less effort than it used to take. That's the point. The line doesn't punish. It protects. And protection is how a life becomes livable. If you recognize any of this, if a quiet in your house doesn't sound like rest, start with something you can measure. Check facts, write dates, take photos of documents and send them to yourself so a copy exists when you need it. Then protect what's yours without making a parade of it. Your sleep, your paycheck, your name on accounts that should only be yours. Find a professional who talks like a mechanic. Plain terms, clear steps, no pressure to perform. Tell a friend who knows when to listen and when to hand you a tool. You don't have to win an argument to recover your balance. You only have to stop arguing with reality. The next steps won't be glamorous. They'll be practical. That's the good news. Practical sticks. When the day ends, write down one fact, one feeling, one step. Tomorrow, repeat. You'll wake one morning and realize the ground stopped moving while you were busy walking straight. Love isn't a race you rejoin at the next mile marker. It's a door you approach when your shoes are tied and your breathing is even. I'm not rushing there. I'm sweeping the porch, fixing the hinge, setting the light to a warm bulb so I can see who I am before anyone else does. Friends ask if I'm back out there. The truth is simpler. I'm in here, learning the weight of my own keys. When the right knock comes, I'll hear it because the house is quiet and the locks aren't jammed. Until then, mornings belong to coffee and a pair of shoes that know the route. Evenings belong to a chair that faces a window, not a door. I leave it cracked a little anyway, the way you do for fresh air, not for rescue. Future me can handle the rest. Present me keeps the floor clean, the calendar honest, and the door ready to open when readiness becomes real. Justice, for me, looked like clean paperwork and a shut door, not speeches in a crowded room. The court stamped what needed stamping. The rest belonged to silence used in the right places. I kept a small binder on the shelf with taxes and warranties, a reminder that order is a kind of mercy. When people asked how I was doing, I answered with weather and work, the safe ground where lives meet without spilling. A neighbor waved, the mail showed up on time, and the light in the hallway kept flickering until the landlord finally changed the bulb. That small fix told the whole story. Identify the problem, do the work, move on. No audience required. In the evenings, I took short walks and let the day settle. The urge to explain passed like a truck on the interstate, loud for a moment, then gone. Quiet carried the weight better than volume ever could. Justice held its shape because the facts already did. Stories love a villain. Real life rarely needs one. I kept Darius as a name on a receipt and nothing more. Natalie stayed a person who made a decision, not a monster to feed. That choice simplified the map. When resentment tried to rent a room, it faced paperwork it couldn't complete. No references, no deposit. I focused on my square footage. Dishes rinsed, shirts folded, bills paid by the date in the corner. On the radio, a caller turned a bad day at work into a tale with heroes and enemies. I let the dial sit where it was and watched the road. In the grocery line, a couple argued over brand versus price. Both were right, neither could hear it. Kindness for strangers didn't excuse what happened to me. It just kept the edges smooth enough to touch. The story stood on its legs without costumes. That was enough. When I locked up at night, the deadbolt slid easy. Doors behave better without drama. Some mornings, I place my wallet, keys, and phone on the counter in a tidy row and ask one question. Which way is north today? The answer lands in 3 words: self-respect, order, discipline. Self-respect means saying no even when yes would sound generous. Order means the calendar tells the truth before feelings edit it. Discipline means doing the small things on time so the big things never pile up. I tested the compass on everyday tasks. Trash out on pickup night. 10 minutes to tidy the entry. An email answered in 2 lines instead of a paragraph that wanders. On a jog, I used the last block to slow my pace instead of racing the finish. That small restraint felt like a promise kept to my knees and my future. Back home, I set a screwdriver and a spare outlet cover on the table for tomorrow's list. The needle stayed steady. North wasn't a place to find, just a line to follow, one decision at a time. If your house is quiet in a way that steals sleep, begin with a truth you can hold. Write dates, save copies, put receipts in a clear bag and label it with a black marker. Call someone whose job is to speak in steps, not speeches. Tell one friend who won't turn your life into a group project. When your chest whispers, check the facts, answer it. Courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it signs and files. The aftermath will feel plain. Meals you cook, rooms you clean, walks you take when the sun is kind. Plain is good. Plain sticks. Say a simple sentence out loud at the sink. I choose what keeps me steady. Then prove it once before lunch and once before bed. The day will respect you for it. One afternoon, you'll realize the ground has held for a while now, and the clock on the wall sounds like a metronome instead of a countdown. That's your sign. Keep going. Quiet works. Here's what mattered when the noise settled. I bought the test. It came back positive. The doctor said 6, maybe 7 weeks. Her girl's trip was 6.5. The numbers agreed where explanations didn't. I chose silence where shouting wanted the mic, and a lawyer where chaos wanted company. I documented, separated, signed. Then I packed a bag, locked the door behind me, and drove toward a life measured in calendars and clean breaths. Peace didn't arrive with trumpets. It showed up in small proofs: sleep that holds, coffee that tastes like morning, a room that stays the temperature you set. That's the whole story the way a man can carry it. Test, positive, physicians dating Illes Jamaica, process over performance, exit, quiet that lasts. If this helped one man choose self-respect over turmoil, tap like, hit subscribe, and share your story anonymously. No fight, no drama, just facts and a decision. And if you need a sign to start, let this be it.